Thanks everyone for joining us for this 7 Insider event with John Stanmeyer. We're going to be talking about the work that he's done recently in Ukraine and near Ukraine, covering the refugee crisis caused by the Russian invasion. John, let's begin with when you went to Ukraine. When did you decide to go, and why did you decide to go? What was the purpose of the trip?
Oh, well, I was here, probably sitting on this sofa, editing for an upcoming book, and this insanity began on, I think it was February 24th, and I'd been to Ukraine many times, hosted a workshop there, traveled there, know the country pretty well, did a story for National Geographic there. There was a sort of a global piece, but there was a significant part of it from Ukraine, and knowing just the realities of our human insanity, I would have gone insane probably just sitting here and not trying to play whatever insignificant role that I could give to. And the next day, I made the decision to go. I just sent myself. And by the 26th of February, I guess, somewhere around there, I was in Warsaw. And I could not, as a human being, not as a photographer, maybe I guess as a photographer too, but I couldn't, maybe in the act of being a photographer, I could not give to that act of being a photographer to try in any means possible to share the calamities of these events that many of us, I'm sure you too, David, with your history at World Press and just your knowledge of photography, that we've witnessed too many times before, just to play some role in it. So that's why I went.
Did you have a commission before you went, or you were financing yourself, you were going there by yourself to pursue a particular story and then seeking ways to publish it later?
No, I had no commission at all. Completely self-funded. I was, again, editing for a book, actually doing research with a very kind one here, Anastasia at the Isha Institute. We were talking about a project that I just submitted a grant to today, and we were going to try to have an online meeting together a few days later, and then I had to politely delay because I said I had to go. And no, I didn't really, I didn't think about it. It wasn't part of the equation. I just knew I needed to be there in some capacity. And I didn't even think about it. No, it never really crossed my mind.
Did you have a sense when you were traveling there, when you were traveling to Poland and then thinking about how to get to the border into Ukraine, did you have a sense of the kind of story that you wanted to do, or the particular part of the story that you wanted to cover?
David, I sort of function in this space of knowing while not knowing anything, and embracing this incredible, maybe beauty in some ways of the I don't know. Because of witnessing way too many refugee crises everywhere, that was sort of the known, and being in the theater of war more times than I prefer to be also, that was sort of also the known. but I didn't know in what capacity that I could wrap my mind and spirit around until being there. So to have come up with an idea of this is what I'm going to do, well before breathing the air in the space. Sorry, I need to let the girls out there clawing at the door. Without me knowing, having a preconceived notion would blind me. I just can only speak for myself, but I would imagine this connects to, I would hope it can connect to others, that you sort of put your head into a box and you're not opening yourself up to the really the vast universe of why you're there. What role are you? What are you there for? And I'm not there to about myself, and you remove yourself, you put yourself way behind yourself, and that can only come giving you some sense of why and your purpose by being in that space. And so, yes, as I mentioned, refugee issues, they were immediately playing out. I could have gone to the front line rapidly if I wanted to, and that actually, I felt I had too many many colleagues were already there, not just from Seven, Ron Haviv and Eric Bouvet, but many other friends of mine were already there for quite a long time. And that to me felt like I was just building on top of a narrative that was needing to be told, has to be told. There's been a bit of discussion I see moving on this beautiful thing called social media of are we becoming desensitized by how many bodies that we see, and the repetition of it. It needs to be seen. But already in the beginning of this insanity, I realized that I needed to go within myself to find the lateral meaning of hopefully giving to this incredibly important issue that affects all of us around the planet.
Mm-hmm. So you arrived in Warsaw as in Poland as the way to get there. Tell us about the decisions you made then about where to go from Warsaw, and logistically, how did you make the trip, and how did you organize the trip from Warsaw towards the border and beyond?
I have friends in Warsaw. The kindest one, Jacek. You don't know him, but actually you maybe do. He's done a few things, taken a few Seven workshops. He's taken a few of my workshops. Of course, I knew Maciek was Seven, but for whatever reason, I reached out to Jacek, and he's so kind. He's a business person, but he's an incredibly talented photographer. And he met me and a friend of mine, two friends of mine that we ended up all sort of meeting up, ironically, or with some scheduling in Warsaw. And he kindly drove us all the way to the border for 5 hours, straight from upon arriving to the border in Medayak. And then I had organized very, very hard to find hotels already, even 2 days into the conflict, into the war, because there were so many, people fleeing. At that point, there were still a lot of us, I guess, already there, but it wasn't at the capacity that it became, a week or two later. And so it was really important to not occupy space that people who really need hotels needed. So I found a complete beautiful dive of a place in a little periphery village, and very kind owner that put us all in this room, and just went to the border to sort of understand what was going on. I think all of us should assess why we're jumping into something in order to, again, understand why we're there. And so yes, you couldn't help but miss humanity pouring across the border, like vastly too many other places that this occurs. But I was there during the really beginning of it, when there was definitely underlying issues of disparity depending upon what country or race you were from. There was no question a huge difference of treatment of people of color, because there are thousands and thousands of people studying in Ukraine in universities from the Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, And that was a very horrific and depressing reality where people were kept in the no person land between the both borders, these invisible evil lines that we create to divide each other, and they were stuck there for 4 to 6 days, in freezing temperatures. And when I crossed and filmed a bit along the border before finally guards telling me to get out of there, I spent about an hour and a half on the Ukrainian side, and when I came back, it took me an hour and a half to cross over, not 6 days, and I was greeted with hot tea and sweets. It's not a disparaging comment to anyone or any group. It's just the dramatic reality and unfortunate reality that needs to change of how we treat each other by the surface of our skins. And so that was really the first few days. Seven, which collaborates with UNICEF quite a bit. I worked for about 3 or 4 days, also with Ali, another member of Seven, on a story related to children who had been crossing. And that was sort of a very important, but a bit pragmatic. And I gave to it relentlessly. And I did find it quite interesting, because then I would learn the narratives more of really firsthand what was going on in country, and not just what I was reading in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, and what have you. And it was in that sort of 3 or 4 days that I started to have a bit of a meditation of possibly how to give to the story once entering the realities of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And you've covered humanitarian crises, refugee situations in other locations. What were the similarities and what were the differences between previous experience and what you were encountering on the border?
Really, David, exactly the same as you'd see anywhere. There's definitely a socioeconomic difference where, and also the border crossing was on land versus, let's say, the Rohingya crisis out of Myanmar that was going by rafts, human-made rafts, or the Syrian exodus into Turkey. I don't know what year that was, when ISIS was trying to take over the cities in Syria along the Turkish border. Reminded me of every conceivable one, whereas, let's say, the Haitian exodus, a few decades ago, again, was on boats. This was just humanity having to flow for the dire need of safety. And maybe, thankfully, if you can find some goodness in any of this, that there was a land border crossing, and there was a process to move what is now over 4 million fellow human beings across various borders, whether it's Moldova or Romania or into Poland. But no, it was the same dire, desperate, enormously depressing. That it could be any one of us. All I kept sort of mantraing in my head, because I couldn't help but see it, was that's me. That's me. It could happen to anyone. I don't care what part of the world you live in. Everybody thinks in parts of Europe or United States that everything is so stable. These kind of things can happen to any of us. And so no, it was like tragically everywhere else.
Yeah. And how was access on the border and across? You talked about crossing the border into Ukraine and coming back and so on. How easy was that to do? And did the authorities, whatever authorities they were, either on the Polish and the Ukrainian side, were they controlling access for journalists and photographers, or were they allowing pretty free access?
No, you had to be, and thankfully so, you had to be treated as just another person holding this piece of paper we call a passport that allows us to cross these lines. And it was just a noticeable difference if you were a person of color, that for whatever reason you were put into another line, and you were held there or kept there or screened significantly, if not astronomically, much longer than anyone else. And this also may have to do with moving Ukrainians out. It was mostly women and children. And it was incredibly cold. It's still quite cold there, I believe. I've been back only barely 2 weeks. But the evenings are very, very cold, and even part of the days. But no, other than the fact that we moved through seemingly very efficiently, and greeted again with tea and sweets. But everybody, at least, even when the area where those who were not Ukrainians were crossing, within a few days there was an infrastructure set up, a sort of a welcoming,
right.
wouldn't call it a welcoming center. It was under a tree, and where crows sit on in the early morning hours, and fires were to keep everybody warm. No, it was like crossing any border. It's just, instead of doing it airplane, boat, or car,
right,
we're doing it on foot, with a massive amount of human beings doing
right,
the exact same thing.
Right. And did you feel welcome amongst people crossing the border as a photographer? How did they react to you as a photographer working in that area?
Very kind. But the Polish authorities were very kind. The Ukrainians were incredibly kind. Those fleeing were obviously, to some extent, and I talked to many, understanding why we were there.
Right.
I don't recall anybody, not wanting to speak openly about the realities that they were facing. It's almost as if, in many ways, they wanted to express the horrific situations that they were going through, and it really was, like any of these kind of crises are. No, it was just, how do you move so many people across these lines that we call borders in some state of officialdom? Whereas, let's say, using an example that is more chaotic, the Rohingya exodus out of Myanmar, or there was no welcoming committee there at all. And I'm just trying to think of, of like 10 or 12 that I've been to. The Syrian one, again, into Turkey, was finally, there were 10,000 people at the border, and there was a barbed wire fence. And finally, because ISIS was moving closer to the border, and it was chaotic as can be, the Turkish military cut the fence, and in came humanity. So, I mean, similar but different.
Yeah.
But everybody was very welcoming and kind.
Yeah. So, John, you're going to show us some photographs from a larger edit, and then also show us a short film that you made. Why don't you start sharing the photographs and
okay.
a selection of those, or if you want to start with the film, we can start with that. I don't mind.
No, well, you had suggested that we talk about the film that I made, called War Through Train Windows, and well, I should probably unshare the screen as I share this for a second. It sort of connects to what you asked me in the beginning. Did you have a notion of what you were going to do there? And again, I didn't, because I do research on every story that I do, but I keep open a vast amount of just fascination and openness to the absolute wonder of not knowing everything. And you want to know as much as you can, of course. But again, when you have preconceived notions or the set idea, you become locked on this track that I find to be, for myself, a bit debilitating to express, again, why I'm trying to tell this story. And so it sort of kind of came together, not really at all, actually, at the border. And finally, after about 7 days, I went into Ukraine, and initially thinking I'm going to go to Lviv and be a couple of days there and go on to Kyiv. And pretty quickly, I, like so many other photographers that were there, the train station was sort of the epicenter, because that was the first, not the first, but like a baton, right? Humanity was in like this medley relay of trying to get out of Donbass or region, or Kyiv or Uman or wherever in Ukraine. And inevitably the route, or the conduit that moved you was Lviv, the railroad station. And so maybe I sure the first day I go there, I'm like, oh, this is, as insanely overwhelming as I was imagining and what I had been seeing. But I still didn't know what I wanted, what my purpose was there for yet. And so I would go every day to the railroad station, and I went, there were always funerals at the church for soldiers that were killed. And I felt kind of not uncomfortable, but like, how many times do I need to keep tormenting a family that's trying to, bury their child, their son? And I went to one, and I thought, this is important, but not when there's 20 photographers here in all kindness to needing to be there. I just didn't feel like that was my place after a while. And I kept going to the station, and it began to, like, how do you understand the magnitude and the heaviness of war, right? Well, you can show the destruction, which is incredibly important to bear witness to, the enormous amount of lives lost. But what can I express that humanizes and connects us as human beings on this planet, no matter where you're from? And I started to notice this stare that was in through these. I'm looking out a window here right now, so I could, place myself, although I'm here in the comfort of a home and not being invaded or bombed, but the windows of the train carriages became this tome of a stare that I would see repeatedly, of losing everything, leaving everything, and having not an idea where you are going. And that was, it took about 4 or 5 days to really understand it. And then I spent probably another 10 days every day going to the railroad station to try to feel and speak to as many people as I could of what it was like to leave everything behind and not knowing where you're going. Because again, this can connect to all of us, and that I had hoped, and it seems to be resonating. The film's been viewed about 10,000 times, and which is not huge, but I'm very thankful if one person watches it. And you're very kind to have me here, and I have another meeting on Zoom over the weekend with Voice of America about the film, and another one after that next week. So obviously there's some resonating energy to it, and so the narrative came from this stare of where is my life going? Not a clue. You're beyond walking on the moon. You're entering a whole other universe that is beyond your control, and again, that can happen to any one of us. Yeah. So it was patiently, kindly, every train that came in, sitting for hours at a time at the station, and then creating some vignettes of the life in the train station. And so anyway, so my apologies if I'm rambling here, but so if you haven't seen the film, or if you have, I hope it's okay that I show it to you again. What am I doing here? Oh, Elfrida's here. She'll be clambering around me. Okay, so where am I? Oh, so did I do the sharing thing with the voice? Hold on a second, I'm gonna stop sharing. Apologies, everyone, if I'm goofing with your time. Yes, okay. There was a little bit of a lag earlier when David and I were trying this. So apologies if there's a bit of a lag. Let me make this full screen. How do you do that? Oh, like that. Okay, it's a 9-minute film. I won't trouble you to have to read all the credits at the end, but a bit of them I hope you can take a moment to watch. or read. leave this up because there's some text here that illustrates how enormous this problem is occurring across our planet. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, and there's more to share. If how do I get out of the full window here? There we go. Any questions on this before we jump into? I mean, I brought up the Lightroom catalog just to show you sort of the main. Everything was done photographically on 35 millimeter, but I wanted to communicate through the sort of loudest mouthpiece possible, which is this thing called social media. And so I created, knowingly, I would move across images, choosing. There were many different options, especially this couple's having to say goodbye. She's pregnant. There's little stories in every aspect of the train window, whether it's the two girls in this and another boy here, to Alexandra, even another woman here. The trains became this, whole complete narrative of what war I was feeling in the war, and sort of the lines of everything. Everything is so firm that humans create. The geometry everywhere was just. I just kept getting pulled into these windows and trying to understand for myself what it all meant in this heavy act of leaving everything behind. And then there's countless video files to put together. Not that I had to sort of expand on Premiere. Putting it all together in the timeline was a fascinating experience to go through. I did find it oddly, dementedly interesting. So anyway, I'm going to stop sharing. I do have another video if we want to talk about it later. This video of the Alex, the piano player, outside of the Lviv station.
Right.
But in case we have any questions here,
So just a reminder to people in the audience, if you want to pose a question, please do so. Drop them in the Q&A box. So a question from Ted, although he thinks that you might have answered this as he was typing it. He says, a very powerful and poetic piece of filmmaking. Some of the images suggest that this was initially shot in landscape format, but edited in portrait for social media. Was that the initial intention to reach a particular audience? Was that, and that's, I think that also for me is the big question, is the choice of actually making a short film out of the photographs. Was it driven by the desire to use social media to get it to a particular audience?
Absolutely, Ted and David and Ted. Thank you for your question. I'm absolutely, that was completely my intent. I don't see Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. It's publishing, and it reaches a significant group of our humanity. We are publishers, and it becomes social when we interact with each other. And I knew right away, because I love the complexities of the 9:16 format, how to fill the frame, how to talk within this seemingly narrow landscape, but or portrait, or I don't know the words, it really doesn't even matter. It's a canvas of how we're communicating, right? And we talk on these and read and digest on these things that we all are ubiquitous in our hands and our bags and pockets and what have you. And I wanted to talk as loudly as possible to humanity. And it doesn't mean that I can't move the story through traditional publishing methods. Seven is moving it. But just to already have, I'm so grateful that already 10,000 eyeballs have seen this film, and every day more and more people are watching it. I want to reach people, and so yes, the vertical format, landscape, portrait, I don't know. I mean, it's all like woody woody woody. I all I care about is communication, and the power that we all have to be able to speak on issues that unite and belong to all of us. I don't care the format you're in. You could carve it on rocks and do petroglyph art. So long as you're expressing, that's what I want us all to do.
Tell us a little bit about I mean, when you're making the film, it's obviously partly photographs, partly you've got moving footage, video footage, and so on. How is that different to actually just making photographs? I mean, what are when as a creative person producing a short film like that versus producing a photograph? So what different processes are you going through? What different things are you thinking about? Are you thinking about different things?
Oh yeah, no. I have a known to myself, a well-known, I won't call it a problem, but I guess it could be. But it's just how I am. Any story I'm working on, I am constantly creating with this camera that makes phone calls. And so much to the point when I'm working on a story for, let's say, National Geographic, that I'm there to produce a narrative that is going to be ink on paper. I'm 80% of the time making short films, vertical videos, and completely lost in it. I could get, oh my gosh, the drops of water coming off of a rain gutter, or some like material blowing in the wind. I could be gone for an hour or so, and then I have to go, oh, wait a second, I'm not really here for that. And, but those narratives, David, that are the periphery, have everything to do with why I'm there, because they open up this excitement and fascination with everything. So then when I re-enter, almost out of a trance in some ways, into where the theater of humanity that I'm in for the story, and let's say in the train station, it happened to me in the train station all the time. I would get completely engrossed in the waviness of a glass on the train of the car, which actually I think is about 3 or 4 seconds of that is in the film, of the reflection of the ceiling above in the railroad station. Oh, I probably spent an hour or two completely lost in the reflection of that, and all doing film. And so to me, they have a symbiosis together, a deep relationship that, again, I guess could be viewed as a alleged problem. But the only problem it ever becomes is if if I'm working on a story that I'm commissioned and have to be dancing and performing with, let's say, a violin. As much as I want to play the cello or I want to play percussions, I need to remember that I'm here to play the violin too. And but I like to play all these different instruments, and they expand each one that we're using because they're just tools. So and then of course I get into a rhythm that maybe has a semi-pragmatic element to it. I don't really think so, probably. But I don't like storyboard. Like, I guess a lot of feature films are storyboarded. Even certain documentaries are storyboarded. Everything is elastic and dimensional time, and I just find that that's where my comfort is. And putting the film together then here in the Berkshires a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, right away when I came back home, thankfully, all the pieces of this elastic space that I was feeling within was there to tell a 9-minute short film that I hope makes you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly think that to me, what is really effective and affective in terms of emotional about that film is its relationship to time, because it does force you as a viewer to stop and go slow. The deliberate use of slow motion, the deliberate use of pausing on images and so on. And of course, by now we all have seen a lot of images of people on trains in Lviv, leaving Ukraine and so on. But this is completely different to that experience of passing quickly through a number of still images when you as a viewer choose to watch and then are taken slowly through this to see how that stare is the same in all those windows. You know, I think that's extremely powerful.
Well,
And both, as I say, effective and affective, you know.
I was affected by
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and of course immediately. But like writing a composition I don't write symphonies, but actually a story is like a symphony or a musical score. You're writing the notes to see, and then you pick up whatever instrument that you're going to perform it on, and to see how it sounds or how it moves. How does it move me? Because you really are only talking within your own head. And again, I think it connects back to something that I hope I can give to all of us, is to be again in the space of not knowing, so that you're open to the endlessness of picking up that guitar and playing lyrics and sounds that you've never produced before or felt before. And it's the same thing with photography. Is how to go, and it's something I'm really working on even more so, David, is how to see beyond the obvious, how to feel first, of course, and then see. And I had a fascinating, beautiful discussion with a mystic earlier this week online, asking those exact same questions for a story that I'm working on for a grant project on sort of because I feel this way, and here I get this incredible ability to speak with a guru, of how do we see beyond what is even just before us, to go even beyond what's within us, so that we're not telling or seeing the universe of our humanity in the same way over and over, because I'm photographing the same madness I've been photographing for decades. And I sometimes feel like I'm not doing my job. Like if I'm doing my job, then I don't have to see this anymore, but I'm seeing it all the time. So I'm obviously not doing my job, and I need to do more. And it really is, how do we all of us, but I'll only speak for myself, how do I go into a deep, almost trance of seeing a narrative, a story, a situation, a rock, a tree, a human being, and a portrait, doesn't matter, beyond what I was expecting or that I've already known, and or what I've felt by other visual communicators. And I don't know if I did that with this. I'm always a perpetual failure, because I want to pick myself back up to find a way to even go and express further. And I think it's a spiritual, and it's not religious spiritual. It's an internal energy that I hope all of us can embrace in the act of photography, let's say, that we go well beyond the expected of seeing destruction, let's say, in war, or climate change issues, or racial inequality, gender inequality. How do we go and say, I've never seen this before, even though I see it all the time in front of me? And I think photography and visual storytelling, it's always the phrase that we use, but it's a good one. Are we really telling the stories to the greater potential that we have within us and within our humanity to actually make change within humanity, so that we don't witness these things over and over? And that's our role. And it has to come from within us. Otherwise, we're just making pictures for ourselves.
Obviously, and you were talking about symphony and music and so on. Laszlo's asking and observing that the sound obviously plays an important part in this video and making the video powerful. How did you decide what music to use in this video?
That's a good point, Laszlo. The interesting thing that well, I won't divert because I'd have to show you the video if you haven't seen it, of the piano player outside of the Lviv railroad station playing Hans Zimmer's song "Time," because I had only filmed that in order to sort of pick up some, record some ambient sound, and then amazingly, as soon as I press the record button, air raid sirens go off. And actually, I started to communicate with Hans Zimmer's daughter, Zoe Zimmer, but I didn't want to ask her father if I could use one of his pieces in the film. But there was a little moment, Laszlo, I will tell you, I felt comfortable enough to do it. But I thought there's incredibly gifted musicians in royalty-free music. So ethically, you're not stepping on copyright. And really, it was sort of randomly going through to not be too operatic and not too editorializing the audio to make it more emotionally arresting than it needed to be if the visuals didn't sustain that. And I tried various ones, even wrote to the website hoster, first of all, making sure, is this really true? We can use this, and you have to give name credit, and then I donate a little bit to it as well, like the individual source funding, whatever the wording is called. Anyway, there are 3 songs in that 9.5-minute film, about 20 some seconds of the introduction, and then a longer piece, and then the closing credits. And I just experimented in Premiere on I know how to edit audio. Learning video editing was a lot of YouTube videos, and a dear friend of mine, Camilla Ferrari in Italy, helping me through many Zoom calls. But it seemed to flow, Laszlo. I hope it did. I hope it wasn't overly melodramatic, but I think the images were of a melodramatic, sombering reality. And I think overall, sure, I would love to go and present the film with no music to some incredible talent like Hans Zimmer and say, how would you create a musical score to this? And maybe one day I'll do that.
So comment from Susan, but she's drawing attention to the fact that the individual portraits in isolation were both very effective and affective, and that you mentioned vast numbers of people at the border. But even though you mentioned vast numbers of people at the border, the photographs are all focused on individuals in almost empty spaces. Mm-hmm. That's a choice. Talk us through that choice and why the choice of focusing on individuals when, in describing the situation, you're talking about a large number of people.
Susan, very good question. So as I think I mentioned in the beginning of this, I did spend nearly a week at the border, on the Poland side of the border. And I'm just on another computer, so I'm not in the studio computer. I'm here on a laptop, so the archive is over there. There's a significant number of images of this mass flow of humanity across the border, which I did for UNICEF, and I created as well on my own. Right, the first few days I was there on my own, 3 days with UNICEF, and then another 3 days or whatever still on my own. That was to understand. I knew what was going on, of course, but to feel, for the only way I can kind of put it, is to understand why I'm there. And then arriving into Lviv, thinking I'm going to go to Kyiv, and being so drawn repeatedly to the railroad station at that point for no understandable reason. The solitude of the individual allowed me to distill the complexities of chaos. And when humanity is in chaos, I can show you countless images of exoduses of our sisters and brothers on this planet through these crazy things we call borders. And that's important too. But I wanted you to sit with this. I wanted you to realize that you're sitting in that railway car maybe one day too. And so that was intentional. And then I did have in some of the video pieces, sort of in the tunnels of the railway station, the lines and lines of people. This was 24 hours a day. You have to remember at the height of the beginning of the war, for the first 3 weeks, some 60,000 people moved, left Ukraine every day. Now it's still enormous, 10,000 a day. But of the 60,000 leaving various border crossings out of around Ukraine, a good 10,000 or more were leaving through this one railway station. And then I had a reflection of the marble facade of the staircases of people moving. So I wanted to show there were numbers, but I wanted you to sit with the fact that you or I can be sitting in that same train compartment. And so that was the intentional reason to sit with it, to become not taken into it, but to have the solitude of the magnitude of that stare that all of us will one day, possibly, I hope it doesn't happen, of when you leave everything behind.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting research actually on this question of focusing on individuals versus focusing on a mass of people in images and the sort of effect it has on the audience. And so for people in the audience, I'd actually say that we just published an article on the 7 Insider blog on the impact of images, part 2, which talks about the social psychological concept of the identifiable victim effect, that if photographs focus on individuals so that they are identifiable victims, they tend to have more powerful effects on audiences. So if you want to delve into that issue and kind of the research behind that, have a look at that article on the 7 Insider blog. It explores that. So
that's fascinating, David.
A related point to exactly what you're saying there, John. A technical question from Anthony. Did you ever consider shooting this story on film as opposed to digital?
I respect the question, Anthony, but if I could illustrate it with finger painting, if I could illustrate it with a chisel on wood, if I could illustrate it with film, digital, none of the actual material used to create has any meaningful meaning to me in regards to how we should communicate. Is a image of a starving child more interesting because it's made on film and it has some grain? I'm not trying to be rude or anything or mean like that, but these are the kind of questions we should be asking ourselves. And it occurred when we, now it's almost 15 or more years of, when we moved from film cameras or film movie cameras to digital. I never understood or wanted to bother myself with, oh, I'm a purist with film. I could care less. Everything is about communication. So would I want to do it with film? Boom. My last book I did all with film, but I was using a Holga, and I wanted that giving that tool, that light tight box gave to that film. If there was a digital Holga, I don't care. So I respect it. But I hope we can, at this point of creating, focus and give relentlessly to telling the story and not, or creating a carving and not discuss the chisels and the hammers or the soup and not talk about the pot and the ladle that was used to cook the soup.
A couple of questions about how you felt working there and so on. One from Kay, particularly working in the train station in Lviv, knowing that Lviv was attacked in a number of missile attacks. Did you ever feel in danger at any point? And if so, how did that affect you and the way you worked?
Okay, good question. Yeah, there were air raid sirens, repeatedly. Not in the beginning. but for a couple of days, I don't recall air raid signs. I even have an air raid app on my phone that I keep on. I can't seem to let go. I still feel so connected there. No, I mean, I'm not trying to say that I feel jaded by, being in enough conflicts or too many conflicts that I'm not affected by it. No. But no, I mean, this is maybe a weird analogy to give. Maybe it has some context. I'll be vulnerable and share it with you. Often, I used to have a gallery coffee house up the road, and just people in general that I meet. But there, you'd meet a lot of people when I was there. And if somebody would say, "Oh, where are you off to?" And I'd be saying, "I don't know, I'm going to Indonesia, I'm going to Argentina, or whatever." Or at that, I remember one time Turkey or something like that, because the Syrian crisis was of course beginning or occurring. And anyway, a common question that I'm asked is, "Oh, be careful, be safe." And my response, and I still do it today, not to be rude, but I always say, "Well, thank you very much. You're very kind. But be safe when you take a shower today, because just in North America alone, some 30,000 people die slipping in a bathtub." So I put things into context of, I can die and get injured slipping down the steps of this incredibly old, strange home I live in. So I'm aware of my vulnerability in every dimension that I'm moving, whether I'm crossing the street, or I'm in Lviv, or I'm in the front lines of Kyiv or in Donbass. You make the decision to put yourself in that theater of humanity. But remember, every day you have the ability to be in another theater of humanity that's around us all the time, and anything can happen. I was more concerned on how so many people were affected, having to leave for their safety just to come to a relatively safe place like Lviv, that was getting missile strikes, 1 kilometer away, 2 kilometers from the railroad station. And that's my primary focus.
Question from Patrick. What was it like sharing and listening to the story of those beautiful people you photographed on the train carriages? Did you work with or through an interpreter?
Hey, Patrick. No, it's good to see Patrick. I know Patrick. No, because I was funding this myself. So I would use Google Translate a lot. And it's amazing. But sure, it'd be great to have a translator. But I can't print the economics to be able to employ a lot of people when I'm on my own narratives. And then I'd have beautiful in-depth conversations actually through this strangely wonderful thing called Google Translate. And then amazingly, quite a few people did speak enough English. And those I did not get names from. I would try quite often, because they're behind the window. I would even write on my phone in Ukrainian, "What is your name?" And then they'd so politely try to tell me, and I couldn't hear them. And then the train would leave, right? But I always humanize to the best of my ability everyone that I meet, to try to get to know them. Because names mean something, and connecting. But it is quite interesting that now, due to technology, we have the ability to actually communicate. Would I like to have there's another part of me, Patrick, is that I really enjoy working alone. And not that I work with incredibly kind family friends that we call fixer translators, but they're really family, they're friends. And it's beautiful. But I also have another part of me, especially when I'm working on a narrative like this, to again maybe be a little more or liquid, while still being in a connection with the others, and in this case using technology. And so I had no problem communicating with people.
So we're coming towards the end of our time, but I've got a couple more questions to finish off with. One from Bob. Do you have plans to return? And if so, are you going to focus on the same sort of story, or are you going to focus on another story or a different aspect of the story?
No, yes, I plan to return. I just submitted, I came back because I wanted to do this film, but also I could have done it there. But I needed to apply for a grant that I just submitted like an hour before joining you here. I need to do taxes, although I realize now I have to delay and apply for an extension because I'm way behind. And I need to edit a little more on a book that I was editing before leaving. I may go to Jordan on another project in early May. In fact, I will. So anyway, and I needed to pull out to think a little bit. And when I go back, what will I do? In all love and absolute humility, I don't know. And I've been thinking a lot about that, and talking to a friend of mine who was with me. She was a photographer named Haley that we spent a lot of time together in Ukraine, and we were just messaging, talking to each other yesterday, I guess it was, you know, going back and, you know, what to do. And I said, I don't know. I'm in a meditation of it. And I probably will have some notion of what I will do when I go back in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But to be honest, I want to go in it before remotely saying that I know it.
Question from Stefan. Your perspective was to look at people gazing out of the window. Did you ever think about the perspective from the other side, that is photographing from mostly the perspective of the women and children looking onto the platform?
I did, and I do have some pictures of it, but the narrative, everything we do, you could say, is editorializing, right? Anytime we position our camera, I'm going to use the camera that's always with me. If I'm right here, I'm choosing to view what's right in front of me, and there's all sorts of stuff to the left and the right of me as well, right? So I could say that I'm editorializing by going over here, or I'm going over there. Editorializing isn't really the right word, but there has some connection to it. When I brought in the perspective of from within the train, it didn't feel, again, that sense of I wanted you to stick with it and I wanted you to be in it. And then I thought about taking the train to leave Ukraine, and maybe filming from that perspective, but I didn't want to occupy a seat that needed to be with somebody who was really having to get out of there, who had come from a much further away place than Lviv. And so it's a good question, but I wanted you to specifically sit with this, from this touchable but untouchable reality that can touch all of us.
So for a final question from Mark, this is actually about media coverage in the US and similar countries. He says, images and stories of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are much more widely seen and told in US media than the massive bombing of civilian structures and infrastructure like hospitals, schools, power in Mosul, an Iraqi city of similar size as Kyiv. Why is the difference so stark? I mean, first of all, do you think the difference is stark? And if so, why do you think the difference is stark? How do we think about different types of coverage, different levels of coverage from different situations?
Incredibly important question, Mark. I thought about it really right at the beginning of the war and the buildup, right? There was so much information about the early movement of this conflict for weeks from, I'm going to use the New York Times and friends of mine, Brendan Hoffman, Tyler Hicks, I think the Lindsay Odario came in early as well. And why was it, I don't read the paper as printed paper because I just don't want to waste all the paper, and I read it and subscribe electronically to a couple of different newspapers. And why was it always, let's say, top of the fold, right, or top of the website banner, right? And I do recall, from the Iraq War, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, it would be on the top, I guess, of the website, but not this sort of relentless way, in an important way as well, of what was taking place, what has been taking place in Ukraine. My only way that I've been able to somehow wrap myself around it is because the aggressor, in this case Russia, is an aggressor that looks to be aggressive beyond Ukraine, which and this doesn't justify it, Mark, whatsoever, because the intolerance that this place that I happen to live in, and I happen to be born here, and I had no choice that I was born here, of what this government has done in other parts of the world is quite egregious in many ways. But this invasion, this war that Russia is having against and in Ukraine, a sovereign nation, that it because it's Russia and the magnitude of its existential and physical, not just existential, but the physical threat that it has into Europe, and the domino effect that it is already creating without even much of a human involvement of other militaries involved, is, for whatever reason, and I'm not the editors of a newspaper, right? Maybe that question is something, be a great conversation that'll be coming up in, I'm sure, the weeks and months and years ahead, from editors who make these decisions of why is Ukraine on the top of my website of the New York Times and Washington Post every day. I don't, again, there's been a lot of full pages of the front page of the New York Times dedicated to it. I remember one seeing online of the Ukrainian flag, the entire cover. I have a copy of the beginning days of COVID in the basement, because I thought it was quite historical, of, like, I don't know, 20,000 names of people who died of COVID across the whole cover. I remember seeing, even recently, as a week or so ago, after the Bocha became liberated, and all it's like entire cover of a body bag. Why didn't that happen for Mosul? Why didn't that happen in countless other times? I can't give you an answer. My opinion is what I shared, this threat to Europe, which why didn't Mosul in Iraq and Syria? It frustrates me just as well. I don't have a good answer. I don't have anything meaningful other than it bothers me, and I don't have those editorial decisions.
Yeah. Well, we could go on for a long time, but time is actually up.
I just want to say thank you to David here. I see David in Australia has kindly
David Parker, yes,
be here, and Ted, yes. You have a question here. So, John, you feel in the trance, do you intentionally, I don't like the word shoot, do I only gun shoot? Do I make video and stills with the intention, or is it by inspiration in the moment? I would say it's a bit of both. The intention is, oh, I'm there, I'm here, and it's so incredibly interesting, even if it's horrific. I try not to be interested in horrific, but you can't help it being overwhelmed by it. And then it's intentional with absolute fascination, as I may have mentioned, of getting interested in little tiny things that are moving, or the sun, how it's moving against a rippled piece of glass that I have no idea what it'll be, have any purpose for, but it has every purpose to give some sense of consciousness of why I'm there. And again, maybe it connects to how I mentioned earlier on every story that I do. I get lost in the periphery of everything, having to catch myself going, oh, wait a second, I'm not here for that, right? Then I also remind myself, but I'm here for that. I have to be open to it. I have to be present to it. I have to give to it, because in that space and dimension, so much is given to us, so that I can learn to see beyond what's right in front of me.
Fantastic, John. As always, you know, you've really articulated the way you think, the way you work, and what you do. And I know that looking at the comments coming in from people in the audience, they're very, very appreciative of the way that you open yourself up to this and to them for this experience. This is the purpose of having these sorts of events, to disclose this thinking and allow people to ask questions. So we really appreciate your time. And
thank you to everyone who's given your time. Your time to me is even more precious. So thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, and
thank you, Dave, for what you do, and the Seven Foundation,
Pleasure.
Photo Wings, and the Seven Photo Agency, the Seven Academy. None of this could be done without the combined effort of just a bunch of human beings coming together here, trying to give love and awareness and expand humanity to some way, I hope.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks again, John. Stay safe, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, David. Bye-bye.